In this lesson, we're going to explore a concept here in CorelDRAW X4 that's extremely important when it comes to working with multiple objects, and that is grouping and ungrouping. Typically, when you're creating objects, those objects are made up of several other objects. And then to treat the group as one, they need to be officially grouped together. So we're going to look at grouping and ungrouping now in this lesson. And we're going to continue to use the file we've been working with in the previous lessons, our Green Onion file. If you've skipped to this lesson though, and you'd like to follow along, and you do have the exercise files in the Lesson 4 folder, is a file called Green Onion File 5. If you open that one up, you'll be all caught up. We're on the third page here, the last page of our document, our business card. So in the previous lesson, we were talking about stacking order, and we stacked these three objects over here. So it looks like we've got our rectangle in the background, our text, and our Green Onion logo on top. Now, if I was to go to this green rectangle and click and drag it over to the right, you can see I've just moved the rectangle. All of those objects are not yet officially grouped together. Control Z will move it back in behind my white text and my logo. So if I want to be able to treat this area as one object, I need to group all three of these objects together. So I'm going to click and drag around the outside to marquee select all three objects. How do I know it's three objects? Take a look down below. Three objects are now selected. They're three separate objects, but we're going to put them together. Now there's a few different ways to group objects together. You can go to your property bar. There's a group button right here. As soon as you select multiple objects, you've got your group button. Control G on the keyboard, easy to remember, G as in group. Or you can go up to the arrange menu and you'll find group there as well. So I'm going to click on group, which groups these together now. And if I look down at my status bar, it now says group of three objects. Not three objects selected, but group of three objects. That means if I come over here and click and drag the green rectangle, look at that, everything moves together. Control Z is going to pop it back into its right spot there. So grouping objects together, pretty easy. Sometimes though, when you need to work on individual pieces of an object that have already been grouped together, you need to ungroup them. Let's use our tomatoes down here for an example. I'm going to click on the tomatoes. There's two tomatoes here, and you can see it's really one object as I move them around. At least it's being treated as one object. If I look down below, it's actually a group of two objects. Looks like two tomatoes, two separate objects. So maybe I just wanted one tomato. Well, in that case, I need to ungroup these first. So again, we have a couple of different ways to ungroup. Up on my property bar, I'll find an ungroup button. Control U is the keyboard shortcut. And just next to that is another option. It's called Ungroup All. And this works differently than just simply ungrouping the two objects. It's time to talk about nested groups. If we go back to our logo over here, the Green Onion logo, which is inside now this green rectangle along with the text, there are three objects grouped together, but the logo itself is also made up of several objects. So we call this a nested group. So same thing goes for our tomatoes. You can see the tomatoes are probably made up of several objects each and then created as one group, and then the two tomatoes grouped together give us our single object here, or our group of two objects. So when I go up to ungroup, I know I'm just going to be ungrouping the two objects currently selected. So I'm going to give it a click. Now I'm going to deselect, and I'm going to go to this tomato here and just click and drag. You can see I was able to separate it from the other tomato. But if I look at this tomato down below in my status bar, it's actually a group of 11 objects. So these 11 objects in here make up my tomato. If I do a Control Z to move the tomato back into position, and I select both of these with a marquee select and group them back together, Control G or click the group button right here. Let's talk about Ungroup All now. Ungroup All is actually going to ungroup not just the two objects, but all 11 objects in this tomato and all the objects in the other tomato that make it appear the way it does. So let's try that. I click Ungroup All. And now if I come down and deselect and I want to move this tomato, click and drag. Oh, I've only moved this red circular shape. You can see the other objects in here have all been separated. And there's many objects that make up this one tomato. Same thing for the other one. So Control Z, the undo shortcut, a number of times will bring that all back together. And now I'm going to marquee select both of my tomatoes and group them back together. There we go. Now notice that it's a group of 22 objects. Not two objects, but 22 objects. So it's important to understand the difference between ungroup and ungroup all. And then if you ungroup everything and then just group everything back together, it's not 2 objects anymore, it's 22 objects. So that's good if you want to be able to work on individual pieces. If you don't want that, well, then you go back to ungroup all. And then you'll want to make sure you marquee select just the pieces that you want to be able to group together. So if I wanted just this tomato here, I want to make sure I get just that piece of the tomato. And then try to group that together as one object by clicking my group button. And then I come over here, select the other tomato, group that together, and now I've got my 2 objects. So when I select both of those and click the group button once more, I'm back to a group of 2 objects as opposed to 22 objects. So I hope that makes sense. Let's reinforce that with our logo over here. When I click over here on my logo, you can see down below it's part of a group of 3 objects, my text and my background. So if I click on the ungroup button, I'll ungroup those 3. I want to do that. Okay. Now I'm going to go to my logo and just drag it out here where you can see it and show you down below that's a group of 7 objects. So clicking ungroup now would ungroup those 7 objects. But of course, if I'd done the ungroup all from the beginning, I would have not just 3 objects, I would have all 7 of my logo objects plus these 2 for a total of 9. So it really depends on what part of the group you need to work on. I'm going to move that back into position right there. And I want to group those 3 together. I don't want to ungroup my logo. I want to keep it together. So I'm going to group those together. And with them grouped together, now I can do things like move all 3 around together. I could click again and rotate this if I wanted to. Everything rotates, not just the rectangle, but the text and the logo. I could also size it. So if I wanted to size it down or size it up, I could do that just by clicking and dragging handles. I'm going to hold down Control and press Z several times until I get it back in the top left corner as a group of 3 objects. So there we go. Now you should understand grouping, ungrouping, and the difference between ungroup and ungroup all. This will become very handy as we start creating our own objects as we move through the lessons in this title.